George Kennan, Charles Bolin, all names quickly identified with high position and great responsibility if your age is right and memory remains. Now, one approaches this fine work with an enormous and thoroughly rewarded eagerness to see its subjects there at the creation, supposedly, of the modern world. But even as one marvels at the enormous contributions this influential coterie of best and brightest American friends and elitists made to the course of our nation's history, with personal character and integrity their touchstone, so one must wonder whether ours is not the world these six wise friends made, but rather instead that their world, more patrician than ours, better educated, more sincere, timeless in a sense, more at ease with itself, more of the 19th century than of the 21st, more of the past than of the future, more aristocratic and elitist, if you will, whether their world did not make them so different from us.
We're good. That's good. We're going to be right back. It just gets more disgusting from that point out. Folks, these Skull and Bones people brought narcotics in, white slavery, fluoride in your water, bioweapon attacks, murdering troops and secret experiments, and this sickening pimp is dripping over them. All right, we're talking about the wise men, because we've got internal Bilderberg documents from '66 where they're saying we got to get rid of sovereignty. We've got to have global government. We've got to have external threats to get this done. And we showed you the sycophantic, fawning little creature telling you how great he is before he goes to Walter Isaacson, the author of The Wise Men. Now, I'm going to have Aaron with me about 20 minutes the next hour because this is so important, and then I'll get to all your calls and the other news. But this is who's governing our world, because it's the attachés, it's the assistants, it's the minions of these guys that are so elderly today and now passing the baton on to new minions. And many times it's a family affair. And they just sit on top of the government contracts and all the rest of it. And these are the people who have an absolute hatred of you and your family, in their own words. Aaron, reading the book, it's praised by the so-called liberal establishment, which isn't even liberal at all. That's their cover. As yes, they say over and over again, you've got the quotes, they want an authoritarian system. Just as Carol Quigley says in his book, these are not liberals at all. That is their non-threatening cover. These people are absolute monsters.
Sure, and I'll read you a quote. George Kennan, he's probably the least important of these, and yet he's one of the most important people as a wise man. And he said, in part, on page 171, the trouble with this country is that we are a democracy and instead should be ruled by aristocrats. The person he told it to was, quote, nearly sick. He also added that along the road which leads through constitutional change to the authoritarian state, and goes on and on. They all have statements comparable to that throughout this book. I haven't read it.
Well, Rockefeller's on record saying, we don't want auto-determination of nations. We want bankers, international bankers running things.
It's just totally crazy.
But now they admit technocrats are running Europe. I mean, it's in the open. And they're like, little boy, drones will deal with you.
What's incredible is the way these few Skull and Bones people have steered almost all of our foreign policy over the years, generation after generation. Henry Stimson ran World War II as the Secretary of War, and these people here were all his little minions and assistants getting ready for the next generation under Truman. And
they stole untold money during the whole thing while making money off Hitler's machine as well. Yep. You don't just make money off one side, you make it off both.
The Harriman family, in particular, with their railroad robber baron fortune, set up not only the Soviet system, but also funded a great part of the Nazi system. And what's interesting is that in World War I, Averell Harriman, son of H.R. Harriman, shortly after his death, got a contract. I'm going from memory. I'm trying to find the page. I think $17 million, a huge amount of money at the time, to build ships for the U.S. during the war. He didn't produce a single ship. And just by coincidence, a couple of years after that, he suddenly launched a German shipping line and a Soviet shipping line. Never returned the money. There's no evidence of that. They talk about it in this book here.
But you saw them introduce it. It's wonderful what they did. Oh, their touchstone was being honorable and good. Did you hear that earlier?
Look, it's one thing to read no, I didn't hear any of that clip. It's one thing to read Sutton's powerful book, Order of Skull and Bones, America's Secret Establishment. It's another for them to openly admit in a book praising him how Harriman was going behind FDR, making his own private negotiations with Stalin. He was admittedly the person who knew Stalin the most from outside the Russian system itself. He was the top ambassador there for many years, spent a lot of personal time. They exchanged personal gifts. They were incredibly intimate friends, even though he's the pillar of capitalism. Stalin's the pillar of so-called communism. It's all a fraud.
The byword is full spectrum dominance. These globalists are always about controlling both sides against the middle humanity.
And it would have been prima facie a treason and corruption for them to have these deals in Russia. And yet, guess who had the only deals for contracts in mining, production, industry inside Russia? The Harrimans, it was the Rockefellers, and a handful of...
All right, you know, the world doesn't make sense till you read the core documents, and it's all hiding in plain view. They just think you're too dumb to notice it. Coming up, David Rockefeller says he's God. All right, your calls are coming up at the 20 after break with a bunch of other news, but right now we're covering the enemy. Who are they? What makes them tick? We're talking about Averell Harriman. He started the first eugenics records office with the founder of IBM, Thomas Watson, here in the U.S. They helped fund Hitler, Stalin, Sutton. Anthony Sutton wrote Wall Street and the Rise of Hitler, but they funded the communists as well. And that's what Carol Quigley, who was allowed into the globalist archives, wrote in Tragedy and Hope. He said, look, they fund anything command and control. They'll fund all the sides. Their enemy, the people. They want to hurt you. They want you dumbed down. They want to hurt you. That's what they're all about, hurting you. And they have all these little pimps go out like Charlie Rose and tell you how loving and liberal they are. It's a total cover. Aaron Dykes, continue.
And we were talking about Averell Harriman in the midst of World War II while he was a diplomat to Russia. In some of the most tense times of World War II, he was making private negotiations with Stalin behind FDR's back after they set up, admittedly, the Soviets literally shipped over Stalin, Trotsky, and the other guy, Lenin, of course, on the trains and everything. You could see this in Sutton's book.
And that's what was discovered by McCarthy when they shut him down. They wanted to use the commie threat to take liberty, not actually stop the fact that the U.S. Army ran the whole thing.
If you read,
Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
If you read Anthony Sutton's book on Skull and Bones, Webster Tarpley's unauthorized Bush biography, and this book, Wise Man, you'll pretty much have the pieces put together. Here's a page out of Sutton's book, if you can get the document, Cam. It's 120 Broadway. That was H.R. Harriman, the father's building. It's got all these Soviet entities, one after another, a lot of Federal Reserve member banks and stuff, Federal Reserve Bank of New York.
Just like China, our tax money and our jobs all go there by design. I mean, these people hate America. They want to get you in a re-education camp so bad. They've been working for it for 100 years.
And just around the corner was, of course, Brown Brothers Harriman, owned and operated by Averell Harriman. He recruited, he's from class of 1913 Skull and Bones. He recruited more than half of the 1917 class of Skull and Bones to work there, most famous of which is Prescott Bush. I forget the year, but Robert Lovett and John J. McCloy, also part of that little...
And again, you look at the 66 Bilderberg meeting, it's them running the whole thing. These 6 guys.
So let me read this quote from the Anglophile, talking about the Anglophile Harriman, who married Pamela Churchill Harriman, and she, of course, was married into the Churchill family, then later divorced and remarried Harriman. He says on page 82, soon after she became Harriman's third wife in 71, Pamela Churchill received an odd letter addressing her by a name spelled in hieroglyphics. "Oh, that's Bones," Harriman said. "I must tell you about that sometime. I can't tell you about that." When Harriman carried secret dispatches between London and Moscow during World War II, he chose the combination on his diplomatic case, the numerals 322, the secret society's number. And that's just a little tidbit.
Which itself is a Lucifer cult on record.
And that's part of the larger history, how they used the Marshall Plan to dominate Europe. They admittedly wanted the OECD and other mechanisms to integrate Europe and partner this Atlantic alliance. And that gets, of course, into the Bilderberg agenda. We just have these documents breaking from 1966. We've been breaking those over the past couple days. And Harriman met with people like Giovanni Agnelli of Fiat, a very important figure in the early European coal and steel community.
And now his grandson's at Bilderberg.
And John Monnet, who takes credit for setting up the EU and all the rest of it. So you can see it's completely overlaid with this larger agenda. These little skull and bones.
Oh, but it doesn't exist. The New York Times said so because you're their enemy. These are enemy transmitter systems. I don't say that figuratively. They hate you. They want to kill you. Most of their minions actually know this. That's why the Army admits they've got re-education camp plans. These people mean business. You think they just want to murder Iraqis? They don't want to stop there or murder Libyans or give al-Qaeda control of Syria to slaughter all the Christians and Jews. They want you, and they want you now. They want total power. They've hated this country all along. They're getting ready to bring it down. It's us or them. David Rockefeller saying he's God straight ahead.
When you're out on Radio Network.
Okay, in the next segment, Rich, Terry, John, Bev, everybody that's been patiently holding, we're going to get to you, and then the rest of the news. And boy, is there a lot of that. Pre-crime cameras going up around the country and more. Time magazine pushes death agenda, remove feeding tubes from the dying elderly, get a cash bonus. I'm not joking about that. Here is the issue of Time magazine in my little hands. So that is coming up as well. Aaron Dykes is here. Last week at Bilderberg, we got some documents from a private archive that are marked "Do Not Ever Distribute." We were able to confirm documents from similar caches have been released, and we're able to dig up another document from a speech David Rockefeller gave in '65 that was then transmitted in written form. He was also there as part of the discussion at the '66 Wiesbaden, Germany event. And we were also talking about The Wise Men by Walter Isaacson, with Averell Harriman and the rest of them funding Hitler, funding eugenics, funding Stalin. Full spectrum dominance. That's the British model. They learned that from Lord Milner and the Milner Group, CFR, Royal Institute of International Affairs out of England. This is their stratagem. And their grandsons and daughters are in control today. They're the ones trying to shut down the Amish and people drinking raw milk, paying $20 billion of taxpayer money to move our factories to China. It's on. They want total authoritarianism, and they say in books written by them and by people they let into their own archives, they're doing this like you're an idiot. It's like Helmut Schmidt, who was also at this Bilderberg meeting, writing Men in Power as a political retrospective. He admits they want a world government, that Bilderberg groups where they make the decisions. That's a book he published. But these are academic books that might sell 10,000 copies that will never be discussed on the news. I can have ABC News here, Nightline, and say, okay, here's all the, David Rockefeller wrote this book saying world government. Let me show you the page. Here's this one written by Helmut Schmidt. I don't need to see that. I'm sure they meant another world government than what you mean. See, remember, the New York Times says Bilderberg doesn't exist. And you're like, well, Alex, we know it exists. The general public doesn't, because they're watching TV. They still are in a trance. They have no idea. Okay, we've got document cams of all these different books right here. Aaron, continue and get into the Rockefeller Bilderberg document.
Yeah, so we're talking about the Wise Men. First of all, a totally arrogant name to sell the public and even presidents themselves on the idea that these are the smartest guys in the room. They're not. They're just some of the most treasonous and well-connected and well-financed in the room.
They're triple agents, but they're really just agents of evil.
Yeah, it's true, and they talk about the New World Order in here in those terms. The other autobiography that I haven't got to read yet, but I have a copy, is Dean Acheson, one of the wise men. His book is Present at Creation. Creation of what? Of the New World Order. They were admitted